Okay, so now back to the fourth and final mini lecture. This will be a fairly short one in this module 3 series on local and place-based food. Okay, so these were the questions that I presented in the first slide of this, this set of mini lectures. Does greater consumption of local or place-based food contribute to social and economic well-being, food security, safer food supplies, a cleaner, better environment? Certainly, we just went through Edward Jones to suggest that, oh, well, maybe not with especially economic well-being or the environment, but maybe, right? So we've already got some maybes and some it depends. And I've summarized it here, all that I've covered and a little bit more in terms of things in favor of the social and economic well-being from local food, or things that sort of look as cons or opposed to the social and economic well-being associated with local food. In favor is that certainly local producers gain, right? If they have an extra market for their market outlet for their product that they can choose to sell to, and they have an easy way to selling to, then they can gain from that. And if that's where your big concern, that's important, right? It also, though some of those who are processing or have businesses which are related to the food system, they can also gain. So other people who are in the, say, the rural community, they can also gain. So these can be real local impacts which are important. The third thing is kind of consumer choice and consumer well-being. Consumers want these products, and they're able to buy this ingredients attribute of it, then that's good, right? In terms of a consumer well-being, you say, why would you get in the way of consumers wanting to purchase local food if that's what they want to do? That's how they want to spend their money. Good for them, and let's get out of their way. And it's often seen that local food is part of local culture, and Brenda talked about that in her lecture about country foods and collected and gathered and hunted foods and how important they are for the culture of First Nations and Inuit and Métis people in Canada. We can also often think about the brand of craft beer in an area actually also contributes to local culture. So different ways we can think about local food contributing local culture, and also place-based foods as sort of this cultural aspect of food that you might buy from some other place where you see the designation to. There might be things which counter that. Those economic and social well-being is inefficiency and waste. You might have less efficient operations at a local level than you might if you're able to source more broadly. And because you're keeping everything local, you're keeping smaller, you have less specialization, that might be higher cost. The overall food bill might be higher. That might be really important for some people who are low-income consumers. And it might come to the point where there's a kind of a stratification of society, the local society, between those who are embracing local and paying and are able to pay for it, and those who don't, like the Stroudites and the Strouders. And you have kind of non-local food shaming, and I think you can see some of that if you look for it. Food security. Brenda talked about, yes, it can contribute to food security when these local food systems have traditionally been part of how people maintain healthy and adequate diets. She talked about the complementarities you see between Western food systems and local food systems and kind of gathering food systems in the North, and how important those are. So certainly they can contribute to food security. On the other hand, in other locations, we may not see much positive contribution to food security. And if the food prices are higher, so if we are defensive, we create more barriers between ourselves, say the United States or some other countries or some other provinces. We might increase our costs. Higher cost might actually lower our ability to source food. We have that in Canada, where we have interprovincial barriers to trade, and we have provinces competing with each other. We have small food industries to start with in terms of the number of people they serve, and we may be increasing our costs as a result of that. So we may increase costs and reduce the availability of things we want, right? This may have a negative effect on through a policy channel on the food availability, say our ability to source kiwis from New Zealand. Can they lead to safer food supplies? In that survey I showed you earlier, Alberta consumers said that their number one reason to source local was for safer food. They must therefore trust these local producers, that they can kind of interact and see them and possibly visit them and see their production practices. On the negative side, it's possible that there's less stringent, less highly regulated standards for local foods, and that is the case with local foods. Anything which is produced and sold within Alberta does not have to have the same foods, go through the same food safety standards as does food which goes across the border with another province or another country. So there may be trade-offs associated with this claims about safety. And finally, it could lead to a better and cleaner environment if transportation is a major cost, as I talked about, if that's really a big part of the cost, as we saw with those apples from New Zealand. It can be better if the way that food is produced in a certain area is regulated more stringently and more consistently than food that comes from some other place. Certainly, we are all trained to think about the food from our own places are safer than someone else's food, food we're getting from somewhere else. Can also be, we have greater regulation on the environmental impacts of food. It could be better for the environment if part of the shtick, part of the story that goes along with local food is that we're paying more attention to the environment and we're selling that as part of the credence attribute. On the other hand, it may not contribute to a better local environment. If transportation is not a major cost, if most of the cost is in production, we have to think about production then. Or for example, if local means heated greenhouses, certainly we have higher environmental footprint associated with that. So with that, I'm bringing to conclusion this module about module 3 about local food, as well as this particular section on local and place-based food and kind of the pros and cons. And I'll stop my share and stop recording.